I am not a person who is easily starstruck, but the day that this next guest agreed to be on my podcast, I got to tell you, I sent a text to everybody in my circle with such exuberation. And I've still been floating on a cloud waiting for this day to come. Today, I'm very pleased and honored to welcome Katie Asher, who is the author of The Book of Heaven, a story of hope for the outcasts, the broken, and those who lost faith, as well as a top contributor to the Telepathy Tapes. Katie, thank you so much for being on today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Houston and I see your videos all the time. Like when you're on Instagram and stuff, and I think you guys do such a great job. I view all of us as we're all in this together.
It goes beyond even the Telepathy Tapes, because it kind of goes into the spellers world as well. Because, like, for example, and I'm going to tell the story of how you and I first connected, but then I found out that Joey's therapist, Megan Parkinson, actually trained you in spelling. And then I met Austin Moore, and I found out that Austin works with you, and Austin was on my podcast last week. So it hasn't aired yet, but so that was incredible.
We're all connected, all of us.
I know, we are. And it's so fun because we're all circling into the same circles. But let me tell you how I first got to know Katie, and like the starstruck moment of when Katie contacted me. So one of my best friends is a holistic pediatrician, and she's amazing. And she's in California, and she sent me a message saying, you need to listen to this podcast. And like nobody was talking about it back then. And I was just like, people send me this kind of stuff all the time. You need to listen to this. And it gets to be a lot after a while. And so I ignored it. And then about a month later, she circled back. Did you listen to it yet? I go, no. Okay, fine. I'll do it. So I committed to listen to the first episode, which of course leads to the second, which of course leads to the third, and you just can't stop. And now I'm starting to suspect this telepathy world is part of Joey. In fact, not suspect. I'm like 100% certain, because it makes so much sense for everything that we have encompassed over the past 30 years of his life. And so I take him to spelling with Megan, and we asked the question, and this was kind of my prelude into it. It was my just simply asking the question, why do you turn all the lights off at night? And he said, a quiet and dark room helps me relax my mind so that I can connect to my silent amigos. They tell stories of their days, and I tell jokes, which I was super excited to know that my son was the funny one. Like that was like the best of all.
No kidding.
And so I come out of that session, just literally, I am still in the parking lot, and I see a message on Instagram, which of course, again, I often get someone saying, did you listen to the Telepathy Tapes? And it's so funny because it's very hot on my mind right now. And I'm thinking, that's a good law of attraction moment. And I'm thinking that's really on my mind right now. And then, as I usually do, I skim what I read, and I go back and I read it again. I'm like, wait, this is the Katie and Houston. This is them. And so I immediately texted you, can we talk? And you so graciously did. And you called me, and I was able to ask so many questions that you helped ease my mind and settle into all of this a little bit more. And also helped add some realism to it, because it feels very etheric when you're first in it. Like it's kind of out there in the ethers, but you can't almost incorporate it in your body yet. It's so much to encompass.
The way that, because I know people have a hard time. So because we were all of us have been in this, material paradigm and what that really just means is, we were given a framework, we were given guardrails, and we were told that everything that you experience and understand should fit in between these guardrails, which are that you have to be able to sense it and understand it with your 5 senses. And that's really the guardrails that we've all been operating under. And this is why anything that you felt in your spirit or that you had an intuition about, you felt silly and you felt like you had to explain yourself. You felt you had to have proof to think or feel or believe a certain way.
So interesting.
And so we've all been in that very materialistic mindset. And what this has done, what this recognition of this essentially other part of our nature has exposed us to is that there's more than what we can perceive with our senses. And it's funny, I actually, whenever I was in first grade, and it was, you know how sometimes you have an experience in your childhood and you realize that the experience is for more than that moment? You realize it's something much bigger and more important, but you don't know why, because you're just a kid and you're like, why does this feel so much bigger than just this? And what it was first grade, and the teacher had set up little booths, little like learning centers, right? You remember we had those in the little day? You'd go in the little booth. Yeah, remember? I loved those. I thought they were really great. But it was to teach us to identify and isolate each sense. So we were to like blindfold ourselves, put on, earmuffs, and just experience one sensation at a time. So block out everything except visual, block out everything except hearing. And obviously she couldn't do it completely. But I remember in that moment just having this kind of like, wow, this awareness of these individual senses, and that they operated uniquely in our brain. And I didn't know why that would matter. But then later, of course, now that my son has all of this, incredible sensory perception, and I'm beginning to understand the depths of which these senses and energy, which is what we're really perceiving as different quantifications of energy. But that's what's happening, is that all of these this energy is basically being perceived through different channels of our sensory system and then processed differently. But in these guys, in our kids, it's all intermingled. And that awareness that really everything is interconnected, and that we think light is light and sound is sound and taste is taste and smell is smell. When in reality, light has a sound because it's a wavelength and it's a frequency. And so that's why they can see what they hear and hear what they see. And all of these things are connected. And so really
they're simply calling it synesthesia, but it's so much more than
so much more than that. I mean, really, when I use the term synesthesia, I'm just saying that they perceive sensory input through multiple sensory channels. So they're just perceiving it much more than we are. So they see, hear, experience a greater spectrum of the frequency than we do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. It makes sense. Okay. So now I've got my newest thing, Katie, which is, we discovered recently that, Joey's olfactory is exceptionally heightened. And this came about because somebody he loves very much was sick, and he spelled out, and Joey was having a meltdown trying to get this person to do something. And we said, "Why did you know he was sick?" And he said, "Yes, he smelled like stressed out organs." And when I say, that's what he spelled. He smelled like stressed out organs. So then we started asking more questions. And this is something that he faces all the time. He smells illness. He smells every time somebody is getting sick. And then yesterday he said, "I would love to stop and smell the roses, but unfortunately it barely touches how stinky my life is."
Yeah.
Because he smells all this illness. Now, when I think of something like that, and that is just one sense, okay, that's just the olfactory. And what is that connected to on the bigger picture? When I get that all of these senses are interconnected, but if something is that heightened in one particular way, what is that about?
Okay, so first of all, what is smell, right? It's chemical, right?
Right.
That's what it is. And a smell is very interesting because it's processed in a different part of the brain, and it actually has the most connection to memory. And so it can trigger memory. That's why you'll smell something and you'll immediately feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's because of where it is in the brain and everything. And okay, so smell is chemical. That's what it is, right? Well, what's so interesting about a chemical is, and this interesting, ability of him to smell in illness, which he does that too. He may not have it as profound as,
right.
as Joey, but I'm but I do know about like that perception, right? And Houston can also like see on someone if they're sick. He can actually see the gray on them. Okay, first of all, we have to understand where, a lot of illness comes from, right? So a lot of illness can actually, like when we're stressed, well, what is that stress from, right? It's from all of these different things happening to us, and then we aren't processing it. We're not letting ourselves rest. We're not letting ourselves heal. So the body just keeps having to absorb it all. And what people don't realize is emotions, they're actually chemicals that we experience, and the chemicals are created by the organs. So if you're not processing the emotion and the trauma, then guess what it does? It stays there. And over time, if it's not processed and released, you can begin to get sick in those particular organs, which is why he's experiencing stressed out organs, right? Well, so the organs are producing the chemicals and these emotions. Over time, it gets built up to the point where he can smell it.
Katie, you just like answered all of everything I needed to know. I feel like every podcast leading up to this moment was worth it to be able to have this moment with you. I had no idea. I never thought of it that way. It also is really reaffirming to know that Houston is experiencing much, because Houston's spelling is so much further advanced than Joey's is at this point. I have to really pick and choose how many questions I can ask him because he gets fatigued relatively easy. So thank you for that. That really does make a lot of sense. And this is what the excitement is. And this is exactly why we all have these connections, because we're all trying to compare notes and be like, well, what is your experience? So that's so incredible.
What people don't realize is that, like, and I talk about this in the book, but emotion is energy. And that's actually what the word means. It means energy, in motion, motion.
Equals.
And so what we also have to understand is our spirit's connected to our physical body. It's like our spirit has a sensory system and an anatomy just like our physical body does.
Right.
Which makes sense. And so we experience different emotions are associated with different organs, and different experiences are related to different organs. For example, I share this story in the book. It's not exactly a happy story, but I will share it. But my daughter back in the day had struggled with shoplifting. Houston would talk about how when someone steals, how it shows up as something gross on their stomach. My daughter, when she heard her brother say that, she gasped because she said, "Mom, every time that I did that, even though I knew it was wrong, that's where I felt it."
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so, like, it's not just like all happy emotions, right? We have negative ones too, and we do things that affect us emotionally, and so those have an impact on us as well.
So that's even more interesting in the sense that when he first told Meg and I that he has this ability of the stressed out organs, he also said that he can smell emotions as well. He says, I can smell emotions and illnesses. So that now answers that question completely. They're all hand in hand. Wow, that's incredible. Okay. So now that we've stopped talking, we're going to stop talking about me because, and all of my questions. I want to talk to you more about spellers and this world of spellers. And you're so tremendously, beautifully involved as an advocate for so many of these, including I saw what just recently got passed in New York, which is very exciting. Can you talk about that for just a bit?
Yes, I will. That's incredibly exciting. But New York just unanimously passed through their assembly. Of course, there's still more steps. They've got to get it through their Senate and to, signed into law, but they passed the very first communication bill of rights for those with communication impairments in the country. It is the first of its kind. It is incredible. And this is on the heels of the US Supreme Court saying that the undue legal barriers that they had made parents and essentially students with disabilities, with communication disabilities, to undergo all these additional legal hurdles, that was unlawful and completely went against the intent of the law. And they unanimously declared this. And so basically, it is just exciting to be alive right now. We're at a place where now we are getting the beginnings of new laws and decisions made by the courts that are going to ensure that the law is enforced exactly as it was intended to be and is not misconstrued, manipulated, and denied by institutions. And that's the real problem that we've continued to face, is that these institutions have completely disregarded the law and the intent of the law for their own agenda. Right. And their own agenda is, just to be very simple, it is based on a couple of things, but primarily is focused on minimizing cost and not doing what it's intended to do, which is provide an equal educational opportunity for all students.
I would assume the numbers of spellers are growing exponentially. Like what do we have any estimates as to how many spellers now we have in the United States alone?
It's really hard to know because that number, there's a great thousands certainly who are spelling in a spelling journey, but not necessarily open spellers. I would say the number of truly open spellers is more limited. And then, of course, there's other people that want to say, oh, if there's certain types of spelling that are accepted and other types that aren't, I think all of that's nonsense. And we give every single human being every bit of support that they need to be able to communicate.
It's like saying to somebody who plays the piano, if you play by ear, that doesn't count. Or, you have to be able to read these specific notes and do it without anybody near you, and to do it in, all these criteria before we consider it to be music.
Well, and that's true. It's like with math, like, oh, it's not, you didn't complete it unless you showed your work. Like, you have to demonstrate to us instead of just like, Houston talks about math and he says, well, the way y'all do math is stupid. I'm like, I agree. But it's because we are under this whole system where you have to prove to other people your intelligence. And I just say that's complete nonsense. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. What we have to do is give everyone equal access to knowledge. This comes from this idea that the schools own the knowledge and that they can piece it out to who they want to have it. And what they've done to allow this to proceed in this is a horrific injustice, but they've taken our kids and they've isolated them so they don't even have access, so they can't teach themselves. And this all comes from this idea that is actually rooted in social Darwinism, which is from, really the beginning part of the 20th century, survival of the fittest, that they could essentially weed out the undesirables. And this created this social Darwinism. And the social scientists, this is when social science really began, but they started applying this to all the institutions of the day. And they started identifying who they thought was undesirable, that they didn't want to procreate or be in society, that they thought was a detriment to society. And that's where we had some of the horrific injustices that occurred. Unfortunately, these mindsets really rooted in the educational institutions. And they were firmly based on this idea of that we can prove everything. It was the materialism. So it's all science. And so therefore, since we're in control of everything, we can decide who gets to continue forward in life. And they picked the people that they wanted to invest in, and the others were identified, isolated, and excluded, and in some cases eradicated. And that's what we did.
And Katie, one of my favorite parts in the Telepathy Tapes is when you were talking about how, you went to the IEP and they had their group of people there to kind of dismiss what you were going to say. And they said, you brought up the spell boards. They're like, well, we don't believe in that. And you're like, what are you against? What don't you believe in? like letters.
Right.
You don't believe in letters. And that's just, it's still one of my favorite quotes of all, because that's where I'm kind of headed with what I'm about to say is I just don't see how much longer that they can hold on to their opinions without people starting to realize this is bullshit.
I agree with you. And especially since we are showing with great amount of scientific evidence that this is a physiological issue. Even the vision, right? Let's just take that. Well, so it's cerebral polyopia. And I'm probably mispronouncing that, but polyopia or polyopia, I'm not sure.
I wouldn't know.
Right. So basically, this is triggered by encephalopathy, right?
Right.
And so what it does is it basically the eyes are taking in multiple images, and the eyes will actually even suppress and take in nothing. Houston has like what they call alternating eyes. So as well as eye suppression, where he'll go blind in one eye or the other eye, or sometimes both, as well as see triple of everything and it moves.
Yes.
Well,
Joey has binocular vision. Yeah.
Yes. And so how on earth are you supposed to like point to something accurately when this is what's going on?
Right.
And how on earth are you supposed to discern accurately what you're perceiving? So all of these IQ tests, they're motor based, number one.
Right.
They're also based on this idea that the person who's taking the test has the same sensory perception as the person assessing it. So if I always use this example where Houston was given this test where he was supposed to say how many more dogs there were than leashes. And I remember him looking at the page and looking at me, and there was this like, and we were like, this was when he turned 18, you have to go for all those psychological assessments and stuff. And so that's what it was. And he's looking down and he's looking at me, and I could see this like fear in his eyes. And I, at the time, didn't understand that he had all these visual issues. And the person giving the test, the psychologist goes, it's like, oh, wow, he can't count. He can't tell the difference. But meanwhile, he can do integrals and calculus. But, but that's the problem with these assessments is no one, zero people have the ability as an outsider to understand what the person inside is perceiving. So every single one of those tests are unethical and inaccurate, simply because you cannot determine what someone else's experiences are or how they're understanding and processing the information. I also honestly don't even believe in intelligence anymore. I really don't. I think that's a lie, and it's a horrible lie. But basically, I think we have aptitudes. I think Joey's probably really good at smelling and emotions and all these other, and jokes, right? And like all these amazing things that are wonderful skills and so valuable. And someone else might be really good at math, and someone else might be really great at music, and someone else is great with animals or cooking. And that's what we actually need in this world, is people to use the gifts that they were given to make the world a better place. You're not 100%. A better or smarter person because you can do one thing better than another thing. You just have that gift, and that's it.
There's the flip side of every single attribute you have. To whether, like, for example, I have a very short attention span, but I get a lot of stuff done. Mm-hmm. So which one do I focus on? Do I focus on my lack? I don't read books very well, despite the very large amount of books. Those aren't mine. I don't read a lot, but I'm this incredible listener, and I love to listen to people, and I get information firsthand by talking to people. When we focus on what it is, I love what you're saying, what our attributes are instead of where our shortages are. I mean, that just makes so much more sense also to our own, if we want to call it evolution, but our own development as humankind, as we are expanding in this consciousness and learning more and more. wouldn't focusing on the attributes make the most amount of sense? I have one daughter who I would love to have cook for me. I have another daughter who I would not love to have cook for me, but she can decorate my house. So it's like, if I need someone to cook for me, I'm going to invite the one that knows that it has that attribute. And if I need somebody to tell me which color I need to paint, I'm going to call the other one. Why do we have to just downplay what we can't do instead of focusing on what we can do?
What they've actually done, there was a book that talked about this exact thing, that said this idea that we're supposed to invest in the things we're bad at. They said that's absolutely ridiculous, that you actually become a more productive person by investing in the things that you're good at. The entire way that we educate with this idea that you're supposed to be
all across the board,
is just flawed. It's deeply flawed. And I would love to see from a much younger age, yes, let's learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then let's find out who we are. Let's learn how to be really good people, good to each other, good to our environment. And then let's find out what we are naturally gifted in, so we can give that back to the world.
Yeah, 100%. Wow. That's so good. Yeah. And that kind of brings me into my other thing I wanted to discuss, which is, like, I love Austin Moore. I was so happy to have him on the show because he really customizes the type of spelling therapy he does with each individual. Some need different techniques, and that's the way we have to look at, because even with spellers, they learn in different ways. And they need assistance in different ways. Now, Joey, he binds his arms because he has a stim of hitting his head. He feels if his hands are free and his head is free, that he needs to hit his head. So he binds his arms in his coat, or he wears a helmet. It has to be one or the other. So when he goes into his spell sessions and now he has to have his arms free, we take a exercise band and we wrap it around him so that he's bound here and he still has this available. And then when she's reading the lesson, he puts his arm back in and binds himself until the lesson's out, and then he goes. Now, anybody watching that, and they have, because I show a lot of this on social media, like, that's where they start putting the focus on, why is he doing this? Why are you doing this to him? That's somehow swaying the results. I don't even know how. Like, I always laugh because I feel like if my sitting next to him is giving him some sort of Morse code to know what to say next, that's a hell of a talent. And I would probably be more excited about that than him actually knowing how to spell. So it's like, there's just really no denying that these kids all have their own unique support systems to help them become spellers in whatever way they can.
Well, when you go back and you look at actually what is going on, you realize that all of the different physiological issues are unique to the person. So if I am nearsighted,
right,
and someone gives me hearing aids, is that an appropriate support? No, it's not. And so if we're going to accurately and lovingly support people with physiological impairments and needs, then we make the supports appropriate to the need. It's like, the whole thing about the ramp, remember? Like, you don't make a ramp like really tall, or you don't make it really long. You make it appropriate so that it both supports the individual and doesn't put any undue strain on them. And it acknowledges what the need actually is. What they want to do, what they're really trying to do with all those things, is ignore that there's a need. And instead say that there's no intelligence, that there's not a person there. And it's ableism at its finest. And we've done a fantastic job of creating a society where people want to show that they're better than other people. And I just don't believe in that. I think that all of us have things we're not good at and impairments and things we need to improve. And we all need support in certain areas of our lives. And this isn't something that we should count against someone because they need support in a certain area. Because then what about ourselves? Like, we need support in certain areas. Like it's very hypocritical.
It is. It's so good. Thanks, Katie, for all of that. That was very, very, very wise. Lots of nuggets there for sure. Here's my next question. Can spelling and telepathy be separate?
The short answer is no. And I will explain why. So you have to go back to understand how the brain actually develops. So first of all, we are a dual being. We are a spirit with a physical body. That's just how we all are. We come into this world with massive amounts of sensory synapses to absorb the metaphysical and the physical world and learn where we are in this body and in this world. Mm-hmm. And these are the sensory synapses that are absorbing. This is how they say that infants learn at such an incredible high rate. It's because of all of those sensory synapses that they're absorbing. Well, that is, they're absorbing emotion, they're absorbing thought, they're absorbing the whole world, as well as matter and the temperature, the touch, the sight, the sounds. They're learning all of that. And what happens is, have you ever seen like remember with the little babies whenever they're first, born, and you pick them up, and if you take the blanket off of them, they go, the startle reflex. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's a baby whose vestibular system has not yet developed. You don't come into the world with a vestibular system developed. That's because you have to learn where you are in space. Mm-hmm. And as the baby begins to develop, then when you take the blanket off, it doesn't have that startle reflex. Then the baby's arms will go down if it starts to fall. Like, this is just how the brain develops as it learns where it's at. So what happens in our kids is they experience some type of an event which causes encephalopathy. Now, this is important to understand, because what encephalopathy is inflammation. And because of the encephalopathy, the brain does not go through the normal sensory pruning process. And this is very, very important. The reason why the brain will normally go through that process is because none of us are born with motor. No one. We have some primal reflexes, barely even that. And what we do is after we learn where we are, then the brain begins to develop motor pathways. And the way it does that is it prunes the sensory synapses, and then it begins to develop motor, which integrates in with the pruned sensory synapses. And as you develop more motor, more sensory synapses are pruned. And this is how we start going from big gross motor movements where I am just learning how to hold my head up.
Right.
I'm just learning how to sit up. Then I'm learning how to crawl, and this is where primal reflex integration happens, and the sensory and the motor become integrated. Because they have this event that causes the encephalopathy that disrupts that process of development, their minds are still taking in everything, and they don't develop and integrate the motor with the sensory. So what we are saying is that their sensory synapses are still going to take in everything. They're just always taking in everything. They're always in that state. Now, the amount to which they take in is individual. So I don't want to say that they're all taking in the same amount, because like Joey's taking in more smell, right? And Houston might be taking in more sound. And that's unique to the person. But they're all taking in much more information than we are. That is not a deficit. That is an ability. The deficit is the motor. And it's very difficult for them to not, especially when they're just working on like the most basic gross motor, for them to cut off their main sensory and processing function and to operate only in motor. That's a very difficult thing to do. I don't actually... It would be like, can you operate without thinking? We can. It's called myelination, right? That's autopilot. That's when your brain, basically you've done the motor so many times that you just do it without thinking. That's honestly what ABA does, is it just myelinates motor pathways that the coach wants them to do, not that they want to do. And what we're doing is we're trying to get into this space where we give them enough motor coaching to independently go to 26 different letters, and in those 26 letters, give them access to the entire language where you can communicate anything you want. And I don't want to cut off their ability. That's their gift, their knowledge, their insight to give us. Why on earth would you want that cut off? Because they are more in their natural state than we are. We're the ones that have been pruned, not them. Yeah. We're the ones operating at the deficit.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we're looking at the spellers, and I really understand what you're saying about the myelination, because that's what Megan tells me all the time, is that practice creates the myelination. The reaching helps create the myelination. But now we have these thoughts. And as I'm starting to learn more about Joey, so one of the things that you said to me when I first spoke with you, which of course I remember quite well, was I said, Houston is such a great speller. This is several months ago. So like Joey was just barely doing open communication at this point. And you said you were on him. Like I made him practice every single day. And you just really went on that, because that's what creating the myelination is about, is being able to do that reach part of it.
Yes. And so what you want is, like, if you're going to practice piano, what is the very first thing that you learn to practice? Scales. Mm-hmm. Why? Because when you can, without effort, like when you're first learning, you're like, you look at the note and you're looking at the piano and you're like, is that the right one? Is this the right finger? And you're trying so hard to just get the right finger to hit the right note.
Right.
But when you practice scales, you know exactly, you see that note and you know exactly which finger and which note to hit, right? And that's what we're doing, is we're creating the scales so that they can independently go to whichever letter that they need to go to communicate anything that they want to say.
Okay. Then in that thought, let me say that thing that I've been really concerned lately. Mm-hmm. And that is, I have found many times during my open spelling session with Joey, which is nowhere near as productive as Megan's. She's a professional.
She's been at it a while.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of new at the game. So as I'm trying to do it and make sense of it, a lot of people just don't realize how hard it is to coach open spelling, like especially at the beginning when there's no space bar. There's, you're just doing the best you can here with all these letters thrown in front of you. So I have found many times that if I have gone into a session with a preconceived idea of how he's going to answer something, he will answer it to a T, to the word. And Austin is the one who taught me, you need to go into a meditation, clear your mind, do whatever you can before you go in there. Unless you're specifically asking for something telepathic. But if you want to hear their voice, you have to quiet your mind.
You do. And it's because for the way it was explained to me is by a non-speaker who said it's the equivalent of someone trying to sing "O Canada" while somebody else is blaring the Star Spangled Banner. It's very, very difficult. And they're taking in so much information. And we think, oh, they're only hearing my thought. Maybe, maybe not. They might be hearing a whole bunch of other people's thoughts too. And to actually tune in to just get their motor and what they want to say out is incredibly difficult and requires so much energy, which is why they get exhausted so easily. And what we're trying to do is not be an obstacle, not interfere, just quiet ourselves so that we are less noise in their minds. And we're just trying to turn the radio down so that they can focus, like seriously, like. So good. And so, I mean, as far as ways to do that, I know it sounds really simple, but like literally just look out the window and just stare out the window at a sky or at a bird or at a cloud. Just be still. And you can also use like the vibrating plates are great for them to help them find their body, but they're really great for quieting our mind.
So what is this?
A vibration plate? You just literally get a vibration. Oh yeah, they're great. You can get on Amazon for like $160.
Okay.
But basically it's a plate and it vibrates and you can do it at different motor levels and you can sit on it, stand on it, put your hand, like whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But it basically provides so much vestibular input that it helps them to know where their body is in space. But for us, it actually can help trigger the parasympathetic nervous system.
Wow.
So
I
simple,
didn't know
like,
that.
you know how like a cat will purr?
Yeah.
And this is a way for them to actually trigger their own parasympathetic nervous system. And if you and I, like if we're not feeling well, you know how sometimes you might hum?
Yeah.
That's actually us, without even knowing what we're doing, triggering our parasympathetic nervous system.
Amazing.
Yeah. And Rezzimax is a great tool to have if anybody wants to know. They've got like a whole,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah. And they have algorithms literally in this motor, and it's an oscillating motor, to help trigger the parasympathetic nervous system or to wake you up, because sometimes our guys can be so low energy that they can't really ignite enough energy to get the alpha and the beta brainwaves going. They're
Okay.
like seriously in theta and delta.
I'm on it. I'm very excited to learn about this. And I will put, once I learn more about this, I will put this in the show notes. So if anybody
Yes.
wants to see what this is, that would
And
be
there's a bunch
fantastic.
of YouTube channels that you can watch for that too.
Okay. On Rezzimax specifically? Or,
Yeah,
okay,
and it's
great.
Rezzimax.
See. So in spending some time on your lovely social media page, I learned that you have lots of little tools that you use for all
do.
different kinds of vibrational reasons. I want to hear more about what's in your toolkit.
I have such a big toolbox, and I do actually, and I have never tried this, but I was told about this group in Australia, and they do something really interesting, and they do this especially with like, I mean, anyone at any age could do it who's having a hard time finding where they are in space, but they do something called a Ting, T-I-N-G, and it's
Okay.
something that they put behind the neck, like right there, like at the base of your shoulders and your neck. And it basically can kind of like go back and forth between the two hemispheres, but it puts out a little signal. But basically, it's getting the two hemispheres of the brain to know where you are in space. And it's very unintrusive. So
Okay.
it's very passive. So over time, the brain begins to learn, okay, wait, this is where I am. This is where we
Amazing.
are. Yeah. And
I'm
so
excited.
I've never tried it. It sounds amazing. And that's just the first step in their process. They have a whole like developmental process where they slowly take people through the different stages of development. With our methods in the US are real like, aggressive, right? We don't do anything passively. We're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you have to do this. And
Yeah.
and so this is more of that passive, like letting the body learn where it's at. And
Okay.
and this is, you've heard some of these guys say, I didn't know I had hands. I didn't
Right.
know where my body was.
Right.
And that's what we really like need to focus on. So number one, if anyone tells me I've got a little one, where do I start? Because you'll get this question a lot where like, are they too young to learn? And I actually don't think anyone's too young to learn language. Language is natural. You're absorbing language all the time. We're absorbing words all the time. Are naturally acquiring and learning language because that's how the brain is wired. So what we want to do is create that sensory motor connection. And the way we're going to do that is like there's primal reflex integration therapy. That's fantastic. And then like making language, again, part of your life, having closed caption. So they're reading the words all the time. So they're seeing language, helping them learn to point, like having a laser and like tracking a laser on the wall and
Right.
having them put the laser at a certain point and have them touch it and then pull their arm back and then retouch at a different point and pull their arm back. You're working on these really basic motor movements that are going to be critical for spelling.
I spend a lot of money in vision therapy, and that's the majority of work that they're doing is basically just doing any sort of visual crossover.
Yes.
That's the majority.
And obviously, if you definitely go to a vision specialist, They are just incredible. They have all kinds of tools that they will use and in their vision therapy, including prism glasses, but they also have some
Right.
other things where they use light therapy. And so like Houston has these glasses that he'll wear and he has to wear them in the sun because it actually uses light to rewire the brain. And
Oh,
and so people don't understand how important vision is because vision is you have two different types of like visual motor. You have saccades and pursuits. And both of these are help the brain take in information and process movement. And this is all done in the vestibular system as well as what you're hearing. So your vestibular organ is processing what you hear and what you see to tell you where you are in space.
mhm.
And because they are taking in so much hearing and such a distortion of visual information, as well as additional visual information because they're perceiving the metaphysical as well, it's very difficult for their brain to process the same information in a way that's accurate to our very small amount of information. So again, we're processing much less information than they are, and they're processing much more. And so these are just basically, I'm trying to give you both the extent of the problem or the gift.
Yeah, it's great.
As well as different things that I'm doing to help
Help
them
regulate.
accommodate where I am and where they are so we can kind of meet together. I'll give you a really quick example.
Please.
So prism glasses.
Yes.
Houston, explained how, essentially he sees triple of everything and it moves. Well, not to mention he sees all the metaphysical as well. And he said in the beginning, when he was little, he said, it was so hard for me to understand what the original source of sensory input was because he was experiencing so many different levels of it. Essentially, he was trying to figure out, is that something she's seeing or something she's hearing? Because he is seeing and hearing both, right? So he's like, how is she reacting? Okay, I think that's sound, like.
So interesting.
Right. And so whenever we got him prism glasses, he kept taking them off. Right. And I was like, oh no, like, do you not like them? Like, what's wrong? Like, I thought he was going to like these things. And he said, I'm entering my mind through the strangest of ways. My mind is only processing one image. And I went, oh my word, his brain has been wired that way. So we don't recognize the extent to which their brains are wired so differently. And we're trying to expect them to act in our, three-dimensional world with one image.
Katie, we have been through 5 pairs of prism glasses. 5. The majority of them were tossed in some body of water. One of them was tossed on the freeway. One of them, the last one we had, which we had for all of 48 hours, $350 transition prism glasses. We had him for 48 hours. He went on a bike ride with a new caregiver, and he started the bike ride with the glasses on. He finished them with them off, and they have no idea where they went along the way. But this makes sense. So he liked them for a while, and then he just started tossing them. So it's just not what they are used to and what has become the normal for them anymore, that they don't really want to shift back to that
It was
one-dimensional
really
world.
difficult, right? It's really difficult for them to process. Now you have to remember the letterboard. Think about how much they're seeing on the letterboard and how to accurately point when you're seeing multiple of 26 letters. So how many letters are they even seeing? We don't even know. And then to accurately point when you don't know really where your arm is in space and you don't have a good handle on your gross motor. Like, all of this is why it's so difficult, and why our job is to just provide as many supports as they need and remove as many barriers.
Wow. Beautiful. Okay. I want to talk about unreliable speakers. And the reason I really want to discuss this is because I know a lot of individuals diagnosed with autism. They speak, but in hearing their language, they are gestalt. They're basically repeating things that they've heard. A lot of what they've heard from movies or other things in their lives. And I just had Megan on my show again. She's been on twice, and we were talking a lot about can unreliable speakers, and first I want to explain what unreliable speaker is, but can they be candidates for spelling? And what she was explaining is that what is typically coming out of their mouth is not necessarily what the meaning is, that they often say things that even sound very harsh only because they've been repeated from something they've heard, or they just feel like that is the answer that they were supposed to give, especially for those who did a lot of ABA in their life. So can you touch base on unreliable and explain first what an unreliable speaker is?
So apraxia itself is it's not just the inability to motor plan accurately what you want to say, but it's also the inability to stop things that come out. So you just don't have any of the stop, start, and change direction, any of it. You just don't have access to that motor planning. And it requires, for intentional speech, it requires 7 different body systems working and coordinating together, as well as over 100 different muscles, all synced together perfectly. Now, you and I have experienced some like little blip in the motor planning, like where you say, ossifer, right? Instead of officer, right? So that was the motor. You knew what you meant, but you sound silly because the motor planning was off, right?
Right.
And that was essentially, it just got messed up. And there was a little blip in the organization there. Well, they're having that all the time to such an extravagant level, they can't stop, start, change direction, or essentially do any of that coordination that's necessary to produce reliable speech. So what does come out is, again, what's myelinated. Echolalia is really interesting because really people are like, oh, he's just a parrot. All they do is just repeat back. They're dying inside because what they can't do is they can't stop the mirror neurons from firing. Whenever that's what echolalia really is like, for example, if you see someone at the grocery store and they smile at you, you smile back without any thought whatsoever. You immediately smile back. Your body just does it. Why? Those are mirror neurons, and we are actually, the way we are built is to imitate each other, is to mirror off each other. That's actually a wonderful way to learn. The problem is because they can't stop, start, change direction, and they just keep doing it without any ability to control that activity, people think that that's all they're thinking. Well, what does that do? That causes anxiety, right? Well, what does that do? That triggers the limbic system and the amygdala. What does that do? That cuts off access to the frontal lobe. Why is that important? Because that's where all intentional motor is processed. So essentially, all these little things that people then have a reaction to, that actually makes the problem worse. So this is why you'll see unreliable speakers get worse in a lot of these situations, because the anxiety has been triggered and now they have even less control and their body just kind of takes off on its own. Houston describes it very much like a boat that's been turned on, but no one's piloting it. So that boat is going to move and it's going to do things and it's going to react to the waves and it's going to do destructive things, but that's because no one is driving the boat. And that's what's happening with unreliable speakers, is no one is driving the boat. Every now and then, the motor planning will come together and they will say something intentional. But what we're giving them with spelling is we're giving them a way to control it. We're putting it back in gross motor. We're putting it back in their arm, which they've got a little bit more control over. And they can be more intentional. And we can ask a question to say, was that what you meant? Did you mean this word? And they can verify that they did or they didn't. And that's where it comes in to play, where spelling gives us another way to communicate and for them to release what they are experiencing and their true intentional words, as opposed to the ones that they can't control that come out of their mouth. Houston said that words would come out of his mouth and he said he had no control. He said that they would just come out and it was like his tongue was forced to say them.
Wow. this is just becoming a whole new big thought with me as far as how many speakers are out there that are going through the motions, but are struggling with crippling anxiety because of the unpredictability of what comes out of their mouth.
And
I
they're
just,
judged for it. They're
yeah,
judged for the things that come out of their mouth. And how horrible if someone comes up to you and is trying to be your friend and your body says something that makes you look foolish, and then you're embarrassed of your own body, and the other person is like, well, I guess, okay, they don't understand. And then of course that person is devastated inside emotionally
right.
and afraid that they're never going to be fully understood or known. And the whole thing about being known is it's absolutely like this is the fundamental desire of every single human being is to be known. And the idea that anyone wants to limit that or say that someone can't be known or it's not their real voice or any of those things, who with no knowledge of the person, no interaction in their life, and they're basically, can you imagine from afar never meeting someone and deciding whether or not they were intelligent or had anything valid to say? I mean, what a reach, right? Like,
So true.
wow.
So
Yeah.
now I have to eventually wrap this up, although don't ever want it to end. We'll reconvene hopefully in a future time. But there is one last piece of a question that I want to ask you, and that is this beautiful message of love that these children are our children. They're adults, but they're still my children.
I know. I do the same thing. I say, I know you're a man, but you're still my kid.
I know, exactly. So is this beautiful, beautiful message of love without, I mean, if I had been treated in my psyche, if I had been treated the way that these individuals have been treated and dismissed, I don't know if I would be as forgiving as they are.
Yeah.
They have so much love, so much forgiveness, so much peace, so much understanding for the way that it's all unfolding. What does Houston say about that?
Well, I go back to what someone once asked, actually it was Kai, asked, why does he call it the talk on the hill? And he said, over the years, there was all of this talk about whether the truth about us would ever be known. The talk became the power. And so the words became the force. And so I know, and he said, so I called it the talk on the hill. And because he could see, like, there was fear and despair and doubt, and then there was hope and faith. And he could actually see the shifts of the belief changing what was actually happening, both internally in them and outwardly. And so they've actually experienced the truth that the unseen is the real force behind everything. They have experienced the spiritual realm and the metaphysical realm in such a very real and authentic way that they know that's the real force behind everything. And they know that doubt and anger hurt them. They physically experience the inability to control their body when they go deep in those places. When they go into the darkness, when they go into the depression, they know they have less access to their own physical body and less hope in their community and less encouragement for the people that they love. They see the effects of losing control that it has on their families and the people they love and the people they depend on. So yes, although they have every right and reason to be angry, to hold a grudge, to distrust, ultimately they see that's not in their benefit.
It's not in any of our benefits to live in anger, because anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah. And, ultimately, because they do see the spiritual realm, I mean, Houston's experiences are very much that he's seen God, that he's seen the place that we're really all from.
Yeah.
And he said that it's just not even worthy to be compared to what we experience here. And I did want to mention this real quick.
Please.
So I was starting to talk about it at the beginning, but I went on a tangent somewhere. I'm not sure where, and I got lost. But so this whole idea of us being like, these two, we're a dualistic, right? We have a spiritual nature and a physical nature.
Yes.
Well, that's hard sometimes for people to understand. And the way I like to describe it is like a turtle. So a turtle is amphibious. It can be in the water. It can be on dry land. It can go back and forth between those two places. And that's really what we all are, but we kind of spend all of our time in this materialistic, world. We're just on the land. And they spend so much of their time in the water, right? In that spiritual, metaphysical realm. And so really it's this helping them to get to the land and helping us to get to the water.
That is a beautiful note to leave on. For those who are listening, you can't see that I'm just shedding tears at this point. But Katie, you have struck me and your brilliance and echoing the brilliance of Houston. And when I say really brilliance, what I really mean is connection. What I mean is awareness. Not
what I hope is, that I was able to use the gifts that God gave me to help other people use the gifts that God gave them. That's really all I hope.
And you've done it marvelously.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the show, everybody.
And tell Megan hi.
I certainly will. I will. It's so great. We're all going to have to get together one of these days.
I know. It's a big party.
Happy place. Exactly. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Be with you next week. Bye-bye.